Today we're going to get into the business of risk, security risk management. Something that I have spent a lot of time really kind of digging into lately. So if you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to leave them in the chat. I will take breaks from time to time to look at comments in chat and reference them. But we're going to blast through this today. Oh no, I got audio sound effects going. Oh well, we'll deal with it. So we're going to get into the business of risk. This is my first time presenting this. I started working on this presentation a while back, and I will actually admit right up front, it's not done. This is still a work in progress. One of the things that's kind of cool about our webcast and our podcast here is we're never done. Everything's a work in progress, but this one truly is a work in progress. I still have notes of areas that I haven't put into this presentation here, but let's get at it. We're going to talk about the business of risk, how it relates to GRC. And it's interesting. I grabbed a lot of this information from my own research. I actually grabbed it from some friends' podcasts. We'll talk about them as well. I also asked ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, tell me how you'd create a risk presentation. So I did. I brought a little bit of all of that into this today. So let's get at it. Security risk management, how it relates to GRC. Here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about what is risk, how risk fits into GRC, the importance of risk management, key components of risk management, some best practices, risk assessments and challenges, and I still have an action item to add some more things to this, and we'll come back to this months down the road, a little bit more about how to measure risk, how to bring some standards into it, how to bring some approaches into it. I've got pieces from episode 1 and episode 2 of our webcast where we covered the secure controls framework. The second episode, we actually covered how secure controls framework aligns with risk management. I need to bring some of those components over to this as well. So this will continue to iterate over the next few months. So just giving you a heads up there. Let's get into it. What is risk? I have a couple definitions here. Two of them I got from our friend G. Mark Hardy, who runs the CISO Tradecraft. And then a third one I got, which I will read to you, I got from ChatGPT. I said, so ChatGPT, what is security risk management? And ChatGPT's definition is the process of identifying, assessing, and prioritizing potential risks and vulnerabilities to an organization's assets and infrastructure, and implementing measures to mitigate or prevent them. If you saw my first show, I think episode 1, I talked about ChatGPT, and I believe I was talking about it in the news, and I said, I am not using ChatGPT. You might. I'm not. Guess what, guys? I'm using ChatGPT a ton now. Last weekend I used it a whole bunch, and it's going to be my new best friend. I didn't realize it, but it's going to be my new best friend. I'm going to take a quick sip of my dad coffee mug here with some Mary Lou's coffee in here. Very tasty. All right, and you see these other definitions that are on the screen here as well from the ISO organization, ISO 27005, which is the risk management framework from ISO, and then the NIST 800-30, which is NIST's risk management framework. So keep that in mind. If you are saying, hey, I want a risk model that's a little bit more thorough than just SHAWN'S presentation, ISO has a whole risk management framework. So if you say, oh, wait, I think my company does ISO 27001 for security compliance. That's what ISO 27005 is for security risk management. And you see I highlighted a couple keywords: threats, exploit vulnerabilities, assets, harm, probability, consequence. NIST also has a model here. So if you are a NIST 800-53 shop, doing, I think I had the right number there, or if you're doing the NIST cybersecurity framework and you want to carry on with that same design, layout, and model of those other frameworks, NIST has the 800-30 risk framework. So you can actually take these other frameworks to build out a risk program. Just something to keep in mind. And NIST, key things I highlighted. Entity is threatened, adverse impacts, likelihood of occurrence. So we're going to get into this. So risk, you have a couple different definitions here, and you have a couple different frameworks you can pull from also. So before we get into risk, let's talk about the R in GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. Because in a mature information security or cybersecurity organization, there's generally a GRC component. In some organizations, GRC lives in legal. In most of my experiences, it lives in the information security organization. So Some details here, governance, risk, and compliance. Some of the details I grabbed here from the Open Compliance and Ethics group. That's where you see the visual here and some of the words on the screen. If GRC, so the definition here, right, an integrated collection of capabilities that enable an organization to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and act with integrity. Right, if GRC is done wrong, that can result in a lack of effective oversight, organizational and functional silos, meaning departments that just kind of work in their own lane and don't work together. You have a disjointed strategy from a security perspective, but maybe just a disjointed governance strategy across the whole company. And if you think security is not just a technology problem, it is a company problem. Lack of integrity, poor integrations. You end up wasting time and resources. You end up spending a lot of money if you don't have a thoughtful GRC process. If GRC is done right, a couple things that are important, right? You have effective oversight across the whole company, visibility into how security and compliance is taking place all across the company, good oversight. If done right, you've integrated risk and control activities. So if we talk about compliance frameworks, there's usually controls in those, like the ISO 27001 framework has a whole bunch of controls. SOC 2 has a whole bunch of controls. You'll have good visibility into these different controls and where are we? How mature are we in these different controls and who's working on those? You have good integration, good quality information available. So GRC as a whole is important. And if you get into information security and cybersecurity from a technical perspective, and you're going down the leadership route, it's important to bring GRC in. GRC in is your business side of cybersecurity. So before we get into the R of risk, let's get into the G, and then let's get into the C. What is governance? So from COBIT, COBIT, information technology governance as consisting of the leadership, structures, and processes that enable an organization to make decisions to ensure that its IT sustains and extends its strategies and objectives. IT governance is about making decisions in a repeatable, structured manner to support investment in the use of IT to achieve an organization's goals. The goals of IT governance is to ensure IT investments generate business value and to mitigate IT risks. IT governance ensures that IT decisions that focus on evaluating and directing the use of IT to support the organization, monitoring the use of IT to achieve plans, using IT strategy and policies to accomplish its purpose, and aligning the IT strategy with the organization's goals. So this comes from a COBIT definition in the IT and COBIT information technology. So it makes sense why the answers here are aligning with the COBIT or IT specifically. Some great language here on the slide from our friend G. Marcardi. At a high level, we're making IT decisions that support the organization. We are monitoring those plans to make sure we can achieve what we set out to do. We establish policies and strategy to make sure we accomplish our purpose. We align that strategy with the overall organization. What is compliance? What is compliance? So yeah, we have three things here, and let's get into them a little bit. IT compliance, and this is from BMC. IT compliance is the process of meeting a third party's requirements with the aim of enabling business operations in a particular market or aligning with laws or even with a particular customer. Some drivers here, and this came from GMARC's CISO Tradecraft, right? I have them on the basics here on the screen here. If you think about from a compliance perspective, what are the drivers of compliance? There are industry regulations like credit cards, right? If you manage and operate credit cards or cardholder data, you have to deal with the PCI, DSS standards. You have to deal with the card industry. There are government regulations, right? GDPR, privacy regulations. The California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. Other drivers of compliance are security frameworks, right? So, you have your different security frameworks, which can be your drivers of compliance, like the NIST Cybersecurity Framework we talked about, or ISO 27001. You have these cybersecurity frameworks, or, the CIS, Critical Security Controls, which I talk about from time to time. Those can be drivers of compliance. You want to comply with these frameworks. And then there's also your customers, right? What terms are written into contracts with your customers? Are you obligated to meet specific compliance requirements for your customers? And some of your customers are in highly regulated industries, whether you are or not, and you're now required to follow along with things that are put into contract for you. So key drivers of compliance. What is compliance, and some key drivers there. Now, let's get into risk. The importance of security risk management. First of all, right, security risk management protects an organization's assets and reputation. It helps prioritize resources and budget for security measures, and it increases overall security posture and resilience against attacks. Alan Alford, who has the Security Ranch podcast, I probably said it wrong. He wrote, "Our mission is not to eliminate risk or reduce risk per se. Our mission is to manage risk. Managing risk is inclusive of elimination, reduction, acceptance, transference, mitigation, etc. Are we managing risks to our tolerance levels? Is the question. It is seemingly simple, but that is another conversation." So that's Alan Alford. He was actually talking about that on LinkedIn recently, and I thought that'd be a really, really nice piece to bring in for our risk conversation. So what are some of the key components of security risk management? I look at it as three things. There's a risk assessment, risk mitigation, monitoring, and review. I like to keep it stupid simple. KISS. Keep it stupid simple. So a risk assessment is the idea of identifying potential risks. They don't have to be confirmed yet, but identifying potential risks and vulnerabilities. And then the other piece of that is assessing the likelihood and impact of each risk. The likelihood and impact of each risk. I might have a typo in the upcoming slide now that I think about it, but we're going to follow along here. Next is risk mitigation, right? Implementing measures to reduce or prevent risks. So first is this, risk assessment, identifying the potential risks, assessing what's the likelihood of these risks actually happening, and what would be the impact of each risk if they are to happen. I'll show some details of that in an upcoming slide. And then risk mitigation, implementing measures to reduce or prevent risk. Finally, monitoring and review. There's kind of like this rinse and repeat approach to this, and that's what I'm thinking of. Ongoing monitoring of risks, reviewing of risks, and mitigation measures. So once we identify a risk and we come up with a plan of what we want to do, we want to make sure something is being done about the risk. And if it's not, we need to make sure that something is being done about the risk. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But those are the key components of security risk management. You get these key components in place, you get something going here. And I would say every security program should have these right away. If you're building a security program, you may think, we need to focus on multi-factor authentication everywhere. We need to focus on endpoint security everywhere. We need to focus on identifying, detecting, and responding to security incidents. Yes, 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 and yes to all those things. But security risk management shouldn't come later. It should come with those things. I'm moving on. Some best practices for security risk management. One, you see, I have 5 of them listed here. Regular risk assessments. Here's the first one. You should conduct regular risk assessments. Build this into your schedule. Build this into your regular approach. I'm going to show you my view on how I conduct risk assessments and do risk management in the next slide. The second best practice here is integration with the overall business strategy. Do not make security risk management something that's just kind of standalone, it's just a compliance checkbox. Build this into the overall business strategy. You as the security either individual contributor reporting up to a leader or a leader reporting up to another leader, inform, educate the importance of security risk management. You might be surprised that your leaders understand the concept of risk management because risk management comes from the finance side of the industry. It has existed for years. It also exists in the legal side of the business. So risk management is not new to many leaders, even if they're somewhat seasoned or very seasoned. Maybe your new leaders may be unfamiliar with it. But Risk management is not new. Security risk management might be a little bit new to them, but the concept is not new. Build security risk management into your overall strategy to the business. Bring this up to your executive leadership team, your C-level team, and let them know this is how you are going to drive information security and cybersecurity, and it's not going to be owned by you. It's going to be owned by the stakeholders. Get that built into the overall business approach and strategy. Third best practice, communication and collaboration with stakeholders. This is paramount. Start to identify who risk owners are. Hey, guess what, security team? You aren't the risk owner. You might own a couple risks. It is possible you own a couple risks, but you should not own most of the risks. You should own actually a small percentage of the risks. You will help people get risks taken care of because you might be able to bring in some expertise, but most likely a risk into your CRM system, you don't own the CRM system, so you shouldn't own the risk. A risk into your product development lifecycle, you don't own product development, so you should not own the product development risk. You don't own the product development risk. Build relationships with those people who own those systems. They will be the risk owners. They will be your partners. Communicating with them regularly, collaborating with them on a recurring basis is critical. Paramount, I said. Paramount. The fourth best practice, prioritizing mitigation measures based on risk, likelihood, and impact. This is huge. Risk scoring. This is what starts to make risk, your overall cybersecurity program, as I like to call it, boring. Anytime you have a risk, score it for what's the likelihood of this thing happening, what's the impact. I'm going to talk more about this on the next slide. And everything turns into a score. The scores with the highest risk to them are the ones we focus on. The ones with the lowest risk are the ones we don't focus on. Regular, monitor, and review. You're going to meet with your stakeholders on a regular basis. The best practices, these are all really simple. 5 best practices, they're simple. You're going to bake these into your everyday life, and it becomes something you drive. Maybe the CISO drives this. Maybe you have a leader of your GRC team who drives this. Maybe you have an individual contributor who's like just your risk person. It depends on just how big your team is. It can be run by anybody on your team. I want to get into Sean's take of conducting a security risk assessment. Back to where we were. I was going to get into my risk assessment here. Sean's assessment of how to conduct a security risk assessment. I'm going to go through these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets really quickly here. Identify a risk. Basically, anybody can identify a risk. Bring it to whomever your risk manager is. That could be you. That could be someone else on your team. Anybody in the company can identify a risk. They bring a risk to you. You're going to ask them some questions. What's this risk? What's the threat? Help identify what threat could actually exploit this risk. Try to get an understanding of what the risk is. But anybody can bring a risk to you. This gets kind of into the security culture thing. If you see something, say something. And if somebody sees something they're concerned, like, hey, I just realized all of our Oracle databases are exposed to the internet. I'm like, thank you so much, DevOps person. Come over to the team. Let me write it down. Let's kind of understand the scenario of this. Anybody could identify a risk. The next step is write it down, or as I say, log it into a risk register. What is a risk register? It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's a Google sheet. Sure, there's a lot of really cool pieces of software that you could use for a risk register. You can use Logic 8 software, Zen GRC. You can use a whole lot of tools out there that can manage risk registers. You can also just use a spreadsheet. And there are templates out there, by the way. You can Google, security risk register template, and you can get started. The Secure Controls Framework, which I talked about in episode number 2, actually has some templates for risk registers. You can borrow one from them. Here are the key things I think are critical for your first ever risk register. You need to know the name of the risk, a short name that you can explain to executive folks. You need a little bit of the risk detail, like tell me more about why you think this thing's a risk. And then talk about the threat. So have the discussion with the person who identified the risk and some semblance of an expert from your team to write down what you think the threat could be. So you can come to a point of saying, yeah, there's a threat. Like somebody could actually exploit this thing. Somebody could actually potentially get into this system and extract customer data. Somebody could inadvertently leave an exposed printer on the network, and somebody could pull printed documents from a network drive, something along those lines. Like, you kind of get a sense of the threat. Then score your risks. And you can do this with a small group of people. Initially, maybe a few members of your security team who can act as if they are supporting the whole business to come to a score. I like doing a score of a 1 to 5. I've actually seen recently scores of 1 to 3, but 1 to 5, low risk to high risk. If you think about 5 is kind of like that score of like, the likelihood of score of 1 to 5. 1 meaning like this will likely never happen. 5 being a score of it actually is happening right now. I have evidence of this happening right now. So like 2, 3, or 4, somewhere in between not or happening right now. Go around the room, have arguments where somebody says, I think it's a 2. Another person says, I think it's a 5, and come to an agreement. It's almost like story pointing in Agile. The impact to the business, right? If this risk were exploited, what could be the impact to our company or our customers, right? Impact number 1, nothing, if the score is number 1. Number 5 would mean a major loss of business. Maybe we lose a building. Maybe we actually lose a product, like actual major loss of business would be a 5. And then 2, 3, or 4, somewhere in between those. And again, if you might want to do a score of 1 to 3, 1, 2, and 3, low, medium, high, or I've done a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 score in the past. In the end, if you do the 1 through 5, your scores are all going to be somewhere between, it's a multiple score, likelihood times impact. 1 to 25 is a score. You're basically going to say the ones that have the highest score are the ones we're going to focus on first. Simple. You have a score. And then identify who do you think the risk owner is. That's it. That's how you get started. From there, you put it on paper and you say, okay, let's go meet with the risk owner. Over time, you'll have 2 of these. Over time, you'll have like 50 risks. And several of them will go to each risk owner. You go meet with them and talk about the highest risks. You give them visibility into what you're looking at. That leads us to our third bullet. Meet with the risk owner, have an initial meeting, and then create a scheduled recurring meeting. In my opinion, monthly is a good time. Other people will say quarterly. Others will say weekly. It depends on sometimes like the business willing to jump in and be a part of this, and also possibly the criticality of those risks as well. So you meet with your risk owner. You have your risk owner either agree or disagree that this risk exists, either agree or disagree with the score, and work with them. That's that communication and collaboration. They may disagree. This isn't a risk, and then you get to a point where you agree or disagree on the risk. Agree, disagree on the score. Let that stakeholder chime in on the score as well. Get them familiar with this kind of process. Over time, they'll be a part of your scoring committee. Identify mitigation with your risk owner. You may not identify it immediately, but they'll take an action item to identify it and then give you a date of when we want to mitigate this. If you say the score is a 25 and they say, I'm going to mitigate it December, end of next year, you say, that doesn't align. The risk is too high. The date's too far out. I need a date that's more reasonable. Check in on progress on these recurring cadences, either on the meeting cadences or maybe you check in a little more frequently offline. Report out your risk register to your security steering committee or your information risk committee. You'll probably have one of these committees anyways because it's required for some compliance frameworks. And then get the opportunity to brief your executive leadership team and your board of directors of the high risks. You don't want to show them everything. You want to just show them the top 3 that are really important to the criticality of the business, that are really important to those who have a fiduciary responsibility to the business. Show them those high risks. Give them the good statuses of the ones that are progressing or have progressed. Give them the status of the bad ones. Even better, if you're presenting to your executive leadership team, bring your risk owners in. Those people that you've determined as a risk owner, have them brief their own risks. So when risks come to you, you can bring it to your IT leader, your product leader, your different risk owners. Have them brief the status of the risk. They're not going to want to come in and give a bad status. They're going to want to come in and give a good status. But if it's a bad status, it shows that you have such a good partnership that you're actually having risk owners do the presentation. This is my 5-minute review on how I do security risks assessments. It can get a whole lot more detailed, but this is how it gets started. I'm moving on. What are some challenges and limitations to security risk management. 1, limited resources. Are you an information security team of 1 and you're trying to do compliance, you're trying to do endpoint security, you're trying to make sure there's MFA on all the things and single sign-ons rolled out, you're trying to figure out how we deal with cloud security? That's tough. Every information security, cybersecurity team will always be limited on resources. You've heard me say a couple slides back that I was talking very specifically about when you're building a security program, risk management needs to be a part of that program. It may not be something that you intuitively think is something you start right away, but I strongly believe it is something. So you have limited resources. You have to figure out how to fit that in with your limited resources. Second, on the challenges and limitations, the complexity of the security landscape. Your organization may be enormous, right? Maybe you have your IT organization. Maybe you've done mergers and acquisitions of other companies and you actually haven't integrated their IT infrastructure. So now you have multiple IT infrastructures. I'm more familiar with working with software companies. So, there are products and platforms, and those themselves are completely separate IT environments. So you may actually have multiple IT environments. Your security landscape could be very complex in your environment or less complex. So the complexity of the environment can be a challenge. Start somewhere. That's all I'm saying with that challenge is start somewhere and grow it. Bring in one risk, and over time you'll have more. The third item on challenges and limitations, the difficulty in predicting future threats and risks. Of course, we don't know what the future holds. That's okay. We don't need to predict the future here. What we're trying to do is build a list of what we know and what we think might occur in the future, and put those on our risk register. And we should be revisiting the risk register on a regular basis. Maybe we scored something as a medium to medium high risk last year, and it's still in the risk register. Nobody got to it yet because of other risks and other priorities to the business. It's okay to rescore those and say, you know what, this actually is less risky now. We've changed how we operate our business. We've changed the data that's in the system. It's lower risk, or maybe the risk goes up. Threats evolve over time as well, for better or for worse. And then the last piece, resistance to change as a challenge and limitation. Right? I'm talking about bringing a whole new capability to the business, and meeting with stakeholders, and people are resistant to change. People, we fear change. Right? That's a common saying. People do resist change. Risk management will take time. It's not something that will be part of the company fabric right away, but it should become part of the company fabric over time. And the idea of how do you do that? Start now. Start following kind of that model of doing risk assessments, identifying who your stakeholders are, meeting with them. Your stakeholders, who you'll probably start with someone who's like at the C level of the company, someone in the executive leadership team. They may delegate it to someone a little bit lower. That person may bring in some individual contributor into the process. But the way to take care of the resistance to change is make this a recurring item that is always a part of how you run your business. And so folks will realize, like, okay, this is how you run your business. You're going to schedule this. People will become comfortable to this over time. So people will be resistant to this change right away, of this kind of risk-based approach to do things. I'm telling you, once you get a risk-based approach on how you run your information security or your cybersecurity organization, there's that kind of thought, and I like to say these words, where my program becomes boring. I'm not just shooting from the hip. I'm not just saying, hey, I heard some news. This morning it's the number one thing to focus on. I'm going to bring my spreadsheet, my risk spreadsheet, and I'm going to focus on the highest risk items. There's always a potential of a new threat that pops up overnight. You think about that Thursday night 2 years ago when Log4j showed up on all of our radars. I didn't really have time to go score that and put it in my risk register. I knew Thursday night's going to be a really busy night. So is Friday. I'm going to have to wake up some engineers. We're going to have to go find some things, right? So there are definitely those items that don't necessarily have the luxury of getting into the risk register, but the risk register approach is a nice way of building kind of a good habit for your team, yourself, and your business. Well, we're going to wrap things up. because I need to move along soon. But in summary, security risk management is a critical component of an organization's cybersecurity strategy. Following best practices and leaders can effectively identify and mitigate risks to protect assets and infrastructure and increase overall security posture. A call to action, you want to emphasize the importance of regularly assessing and reviewing risks and implementing effective mitigation measures to stay ahead of potential threats. And this was a great overview. I hope you enjoyed it. The business of risk, our death by slides today. And I think that's what we're going to cover today. I was hoping to get through this topic pretty quickly today. Feel free to reach out to me, Shawn at cybersecuritygrowth.com, or check out the website, cybersecuritygrowth.com/blog, where I put all of the weekly updates. And as I mentioned, I have my new TikTok account where I am reacting to interesting news of the day. My friends, I think that's what we're going to cover. Wrong button. My friends, I think that's what we're going to cover today. I appreciate you all being here. I appreciate the input in chat. So that's a wrap today. I'm Shawn Valley. I'm the creator of the show and the music here on Cybersecurity Growth. You can check it out at cybersecuritygrowth.com and cybersecuritygrowth.com/blog. Find me online everywhere at Shawn Valley or at Cybersecurity Growth. If you like the show, please tell your friends. If you hate it, tell your adversaries. Please like and subscribe and leave 5 stars and a review to wherever you're listening. And with a quote like this, great show. I learned something new to help me in my cybersecurity career. Today we covered risk management, what is risk, how it fits into GRC, the importance of risk management, key concepts, best practices, risk assessments, challenges, plans for next week. I'm working on a password manager show with a guest. Maybe we'll get to that. I might do a throwback to one of my Android hacking days from way back when for my Android forensics material, so stay tuned. I'm live weekly on Twitch, usually Fridays at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, usually 7:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and usually 3:30 p.m. GMT, and in your pod feeds a few days later, so check out your podcasts as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We will see you next time. Bye for now, everyone.